Hello and welcome to my July 2020 wrap up. I'm really excited to be telling you about the books that I read this month because it was a very mixed bag of stuff genre wise, but I really enjoyed everything I read, and yeah, without any further ado, I'm going to get on with it and tell you all about it. So the first thing I have to mention, I actually didn't read in July. I read it in May, but I have since forgotten to mention it in these wrap-ups, and that's because it's a short story that I read via NetGalley, so I need to review it, but because it's a short story, it's not on Goodreads. So yes, and that is Doras Legs by Frances Hardinge, which is a short story from her the world of the the world of the Myriad, which is the islands that her book Deep Light is set in, and I absolutely loved Deep Light, and so it was really, really nice to go on this little mini adventure back in that world, and I hope she writes more short stories. I'm actually really intrigued by the fact that there is a short story in the Waterstones edition of the paperback of Deep Light, but I really want the hardback because it's gorgeous, so you know, what am I going to do? Is that story in the hardback as well? I don't know. I want to know. Please, somebody tell me. Thank you. Anyway, moving along to the first book that I actually read in July and was a whole book. That was Under My Hat, Tales from the Cauldron, which was published by Hotkey Books quite a while ago. I think, let's have a look. 2012. And it was also published in the US around the same time, and I got this, I thought I got this at an event, but I actually think a book blogger friend gave it to me, like when they were doing a clear out. I think I confused it with something else. I'm pretty sure that this came from a friend, and it's basically all stories about witches, and it's so my jam, and I enjoyed it so much, and there were several authors in this book whose work I've never read before, and I just loved it so much. So for example, this short story by Garth Nix, which I am now obsessed with. I loved this story so much. I've been making up my own fanfic in my head for other things that could happen in this world, and yeah, so I'm definitely going to read more books by that author. And you know, there were a couple of things in here by which were stories by authors I've already read, which reminded me I wanted to read more of them, like Ellen Kushner and Charles Lint and Tanith Lee, and yeah, so yeah, I really enjoyed this and I would highly recommend it. I am going to be keeping this one on my shelf so I can dip back into it and reread those favourite stories again. The next book that I finished reading was Silver Sparrow by Tayari Jones, which was a really interesting book that I read for my work book club. I actually finished it after the book club had already taken place, so I didn't actually get to go to book club and discuss it. I'm hoping we can maybe, fingers crossed, discuss it a little bit at our next meeting instead. But yeah, anyway, Silver Sparrow is essentially about two girls who have the same father but different mothers, and it starts from the point of view of the first of the one who is sort of like the secret daughter, and then the one then you hear the point of view of the one who's not the secret daughter, who's the other one, and it was just fascinating. It was just really interesting. So the father is married to both women. He's a bigamist, and this creates this weird kind of conflict where on the one hand, the mother, in the case where she's the secret one, because she's the one who knows about the other one, is kind of satisfied with the situation, but kind of not, and the daughter is obviously very dissatisfied, and it explores basically the effects that this has on the two girls, and you know, what happens when they meet and try to be friends without them both knowing who they are. And yeah, it was brilliant. It was brilliant. And I really regret that I didn't manage to finish it in time for my book club meeting. Although, as I say, I finished it right afterwards. It was so annoying that I just didn't have the time to finish off like the last 40 pages. But I was enjoying it so much I didn't want to go anywhere and risk spoilers. Next time, I must read the book much, much earlier. The next book that I finished reading in July was The Enchanted April, which I actually started in May, like early May, right after April had actually taken place. And although I was really enjoying it, I was just in a bit of a non-reading mood, and so I just wasn't picking it up. But then in July I was like, right, no, I have to finish it, and I got hooked and I loved it, and I want to read everything by this author now. So the author is Elizabeth von Arnim, and the story is basically about primarily these two women who they're like these middle-class women, but they're quite drab and kind of bored with their lives. So one of them is really religious, and she resents her husband because he writes like gossipy kind of romancy novels about historical figures, and she thinks it's immoral and that God would disapprove, and so that's really, you know, kind of ruined their marriage. And the other one, her husband is like only concerned with making money and is too thrifty, and she has her own little nest egg, but she really doesn't want to use it. She feels really guilty about ever using it, so it just kind of sits there. And then they both see this advert to basically rent a castle. Yeah, like a castle in the Italian Riviera in April, and it sounds beautiful, and they're just so desperate for a break from their lives that they completely go outside their normal mode of thinking and they book it. And then to save money, they find these other two women to come along with them. One of them who is like an aristocrat who's been pampered and adored her whole life, and to be honest, she's sick of it. She wants people to leave her alone so she can actually think for a while. And the other one is this older woman who is really grumpy and just doesn't want to have anything to do with the others. She wants to be left alone all the time, and tries to like reserve parts of the castle for herself. And it's really funny and it's really delightful, and yeah, as I say, I enjoyed it so much I now want to read absolutely everything by this author. The next book that I read is a review copy I got an incredibly long time ago, 2014. So I may have even got this in 2013. I remember I went to an event from Oxford University Press back when I was like a much more prolific book blogger, and so I used to get invited for things for being a book blogger. Obviously, you're following me, you know my booktube channel's tiny, so you're probably thinking, how does she get review books? It's because I used to be a really active book blogger. Anyway, at this event I got given Who Framed Clarice Cliff by Nikki Sheehan, which I have been meaning to read for years because I absolutely adored the concept. So it's about, it's set in a world where imaginary friends are real, basically. And the main character is a boy who didn't have an imaginary friend when he was a child, but he's got one as a teenager that's actually his neighbour's imaginary friend that's sort of migrated over to him, which everybody thinks is like a sign that things are going wrong and imaginary friends are being blamed for a lot of crimes. When some bad things have happened in his neighbour's house, their father decides that they should undergo procedure to basically have the imaginary friend part of their brain removed, which means they lose all their imagination. And the main character is horrified by this because he relies on his imagination to remember his mother, who he hasn't seen in years. And so he sets out on a quest to prove that the imaginary friend is not guilty of the crime. And I just loved it. I loved it. And the ending was just devastating. I did not see it coming. And wow, yes, I would recommend. Thank you, Oxford University Press, for giving me this book like 7 years ago. The final book that I finished reading in July, I also completely adored. It was a great month, can you tell? And that is Crafty Abuse by Kate Fletcher. So this is an academic book. But hey, and I have long had an interest in books that are memoirs, or like stories about people's relationship to clothes, like how they wear them, how they choose them, how they customize them to fit them, you know, how they rewear the same things over years and years and years. I've never really had the correct terminology to describe that succinctly. And then Crafty Abuse came along, because it turns out all those things I love are Crafty Abuse. I mean, yes. So, right, within pages of this book, I was already like in love with it, really excited because now I know what to call the kind of books I'm into reading. I like reading books about the craft of use of fashion. Yes, perfect. You know, then I have to then explain the concept of craft of use, which is really interesting. I mean, it's basically, yeah, the ideas that people use to kind of cultivate their wardrobes and develop their clothes. It's basically everything that happens after a garment is sold to a person. So it's like the part of the fashion industry that takes place after the conventional fashion industry has done its thing. Everything that happens next. And it's, you know, it's quite thick. You know, it looks chunky. It's yeah, it's about 300 pages long. Yeah, but it actually was quite a quick read once I really got into it, because there's lots of pages with pictures and text giving examples under different themes and headings, and yeah, it was just absolutely fascinating, and I want to read more books about this kind of thing. I already have a few, because as I say, I've been reading into this for years, not had the right words to describe what it is I'm looking for. Also, like, these books tend to be under different sections, you know, sometimes it's memoir, sometimes it's like sociology, sometimes it's fashion. You know, I'm not so interested in like biographies of designers and things like that. I like stories of ordinary people and the people who are actually wearing the clothes. That's the main thing. It's the end users. That's what I'm interested in, their experiences with the clothes. So yeah, this was like the book I've been looking for all these years, and I loved it and I would recommend it. And I'm thinking about doing a video where I talk about these kind of books and sort of show you my collection. I don't know that I have it all here. Some of the books may actually be in my parents' house. It may be a little while before I'm able to do that, but please let me know if you would be interested. So that is the end of my July 2020 wrap up. Thank you very much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you would like to see more from me. And you will see me again soon. In the meantime, if you would like to read more books but don't know where to start, check out my free e-course, Ignite Your Passion for Reading, Fall in Love with Books, which is linked in the description box. And you can also find my social media accounts on there as well. Bye!